Welcome everyone to our second session of the Schoolyard Forest Design Lecture Series. My name is Lauren McKenna. I am a Senior Program Manager with Green Schoolyards America, and I am being assisted by Dante Sudolewski, who is our Communications Program Coordinator. We've got some other staff here. I apologize, we're not recognizing you on the screen right now. Our agenda will include a little bit of intro from me, and then we'll have a wonderful presentation on Schoolyard Forest design principles and process, followed by questions and answers with you all. This webinar is part of the National Schoolyard Forest System. This is for those of you that are new to this space, it is a large-scale initiative to increase tree canopy on public school grounds across the United States to directly shade and protect pre-K through 12th students from extreme heat and rising temperatures due to climate change. California is the first in this system, and we hope to include more. Just as a reminder of what schoolyard forests even are. So they are clusters of trees planted as climate oases that shade and protect students from extreme heat, especially as we see increased temperatures. Some of our design goals include planting the trees in groves, again, sheltering students, using climate adapted tree planting pallets with high biodiversity, many large tree species, as well as engaging students in design, planting, stewardship, and more. And we imagine these spaces also as being multi-use and available for students to play in, learn in, socialize in, etc. There's a lot more detail, but our guest speakers will get into those details. Like I said, the National Schoolyard Forest System, we are starting with California, but we do want to hear what is currently happening across the country. And even if you're tuning in from another country, we do have a link to a survey in which you can share photos and information about your community's schoolyard forest, or forests, plural. We would love to learn more and showcase what's currently happening. And just a heads up that this lecture series, which hopes to highlight some of those schoolyard forests across the country and how we design and manage and steward these spaces. This is a recurring series. They are the first Thursday of each month at 11 a.m. Pacific time. We can see our upcoming topics in November and December, and we will continue this series next year, starting in February. Please invite a friend next time. So without further ado, we'll welcome our guest speakers who will talk about schoolyard forest design principles and process. I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Alejandra Chiesa. She is the California State Director of Green Schoolyards America. In her role as that, Alejandra oversees our organization's expanding efforts throughout the state. She provides strategic leadership in the development and implementation of programs, collaborating with school districts, public agencies, and nonprofit partners to scale up the Green Schoolyard movement. Before joining Green Schoolyards America, Alejandra served as the Bay Area Program Director at the Trust for Public Land for over a decade. In this role, she worked extensively with communities and agency partners to create open spaces and advance park and health equity. Alejandra has over 20 years of experience as a landscape architect and holds a master's in biology and landscape architecture from the University of Michigan. Joining her is another colleague of ours, Lisa Howard, who is principal at Bay Tree Design. She is also the co-founder of Bay Tree Design, which is a design and research-oriented practice with a reputation for advancing climate-ready and child-centered landscapes. Lisa's passion for spaces that foster healthy communities and environments is the driving force behind her leadership at the firm. She focuses her energy on the design of projects that restore ecological systems, give children spaces to blossom, capture the community's vision, and create a memorable and beautiful place. From planning level work to site design projects, she enjoys collaborating with the community, other professionals, and working closely with her team at Bay Tree Design. She speaks regularly at conferences, webinars, college courses, and schools and community groups. She's active with the International School Grounds Alliance and the ASLA Children's Outdoor Environment Professional Practice Network and has taught at UC Berkeley. Prior to forming Bay Tree Design, she worked as a landscape architect, specializing in California native plants and site designs that are rooted in place. She has over 25 years of experience as a landscape architect and holds a master's in landscape architecture from UC Berkeley. So again, welcome Alejandra, welcome Lisa. Thank you for being here and sharing your passion and your expertise with this space.
So I'm going to start by saying schoolyard forests are simple and nature-based solutions that allows us to address so many pressing cross-sector issues, including the impacts of climate change and many health and learning inequities. But in order to take schoolyard forests to scale and ensure that all children have access to something like what you're seeing on the screen now, we need to change how schoolyards are viewed, designed, implemented, and managed. There are great examples of schoolyard forests that bring health, learning, environmental benefits to students and their communities nationally and around the world, but it's not yet the norm in the US. So when we launched the National Schoolyard Forest System, the first thing we did was kind of do an assessment. So we interviewed school districts, tree planting organizations, county offices of ed. We reviewed policies and at the state and local levels, and we gathered feedback at public meetings and through site visits. And the goal was to identify challenges and opportunities for going to scale. And we did this in California. We still need to kind of expand and do it for other states. So we definitely, as many of you may know, there are definitely barriers that are kind of preventing us from going to scale immediately. And those can be grouped in 6 major categories. So the first set of challenges and opportunities stem from site planning considerations. There's many public school facilities that were built in the post-war era and are aging. And this creates many barriers. There's a lot of compacted soil, a lot of asphalt, again, aging infrastructure. But this presents opportunity. These school grounds are going to need to be rebuilt, reimagined. And this presents great opportunities to re-envision schoolyards to allow us to address current environmental and educational needs. So the other set of challenges and opportunities is district maintenance. Most school districts are not yet set up to provide the necessary park level management for their school grounds and struggle with reduced budgets and reduced capacity. So this is making it very difficult to continue operating the same way districts were operating in the past. And again, we do need to look at overhauling systems to better support outdoor learning and sustainability. Another set of concerns brought up by the school districts that we interviewed and many others, there are safety and liability concerns, and many are real risks that stem from selecting the wrong trees, placing them in the wrong place, planting them incorrectly with not the right amount of soil and space for the roots, and also not maintaining them appropriately. There are also other concerns that are due to lack of data and information about the risks and the benefits. And, in general, school districts are better set up to maintain buildings and structures and synthetic products with warranties. And trees are living organisms that require a different approach. The other set of challenges and also opportunities stem from institutional systems. The current public education systems and facilities were designed for outdated educational goals that were developed before hands-on learning, environmental literacy, and access to nature were understood as important to achieving educational outcomes. And so institutional systems need to adapt and shift to allow students to be used to their full potential. Other set of barriers, cited by school districts, tree planting organizations, and others stem for policies, statewide policies. There's many policies that, again, were not thought for providing, outdoor spaces for children, and there are opportunities to align those policies and find synergies and allow for achieving multi-benefit goals. Well, the last set of barriers, which is not minor, is definitely funding. And most of the traditional funding mechanisms for tree planting and schoolyard greening focus on one-time investments, one-time capital investments, instead of supporting ongoing activities and staffing needed for long-term success. Maintenance funding usually comes from district general funds and competes with many other priorities. Therefore, maintenance funding may fluctuate year to year, making it really hard to plan for long-term care. So on the good side, there's been a huge increase in attention and funding for urban and tree planting, not only in California, but federally through the Inflation Reduction Act, and also maybe many private philanthropic investments. So this is catalyzing many positive changes across the country. So now that you learned about the context, I'm gonna go into the design principles. We're not designing schoolyard forests in a vacuum, so it's important to take into account the context. And yeah, let's delve into the key principles to keep in mind with designing schoolyard forest. So first of all, we know that tree canopy and access to nature is not equitable. Communities with the lowest income and communities of color have the fewest trees and the hottest climates. And equity should be a central commitment that is infused into the process and into every decision. It's not something that you do as a cherry on top, it's a commitment. So all the decisions, including from site selection, planning, community engagement, design and implementation, management, and use. The second principle is meaningfully engaging students. We are talking about schoolyard forests. So the process and the built space should meaningfully engage and give agency to students and stakeholders of all ages, genders, cultural backgrounds, and abilities. A space created by and for everyone will foster a sense of belonging and lead to long-term care of the schoolyard forest. Another principle is it's better to create forests rather than isolated trees. If you create a forest, a forest space has different maintenance expectations than other schoolyard spaces. And for example, leaves and tree droppings are more likely to be accepted as part of the forest floor, where they can naturally decompose, as opposed to when leaves and droppings fall on pavement. Also, expectations around student behavior can be different in a forest space. And last but not least, a contiguous patch of trees allow them to create their own microclimate and provide larger shared volumes of soil where roots from individual trees can interact and communicate. And all this contribute to tree growth and long-term health. Trees are long-term investments, many of over 40 years. So if trees are present in a schoolyard, those should be considered valuable assets. And the design should aim at enhancing and protecting them instead of removing them. Tree removal should be only considered in cases of poor tree health, tree fall hazard, and if the tree is poorly located and will create long-term problems. The picture you see here is an example in Berkeley, where Berkeley Unified and Tree Design created this deck that allow access to that area for students without impacting existing trees. Another principle is fostering learning and play, including a variety of tree species and other natural materials that can have play value, and correct curriculum is important. Tree species may provide habitat, bear edible fruit, drop leaves, seeds, cones, and flowers that can be used for learning and play. Another important aspect of creating learning spaces is creating shaded, wind-protected seating areas for different size groups to allow for different classroom configurations and social interactions. Fostering health and well-being, we're going to have, I think the upcoming design series, lecture series is going to be focusing more on this, but it's important to maximize health benefits, including improving mental health and well-being, increasing physical activity, and developing balance and brain function. And focusing on designing spaces to meet developmental needs for different ages and different genders. They have different needs, and the design should consider that. It is important to include large shade trees to create cooler spaces and protect students from heat and UV radiation. Another principle is looking at maximizing climate resilience, planting trees that are appropriate for the region, that will adapt to a changing climate and prosper in a schoolyard setting. Schoolyard forests can be designed to reduce temperatures, capture carbon, manage stormwater, and support local wildlife. Another principle is thinking about layering multiple uses, especially in urban school districts. There's limited space. So always being creative about, okay, the space could be used for many activities. It's not just single use. For example, a schoolyard forest can be used for PE, for having lunch outside, for teaching outside, so providing classroom space, space for play, for social gatherings, etc. In the same way that sports courts can be used for events, lineup space, and other activities. This is another important principle is considering maintenance. Again, as I mentioned, selecting the right trees, placing them in the right location, and planting them correctly is critical and significantly will reduce maintenance burdens. But it's also very important to look at the maintenance needs for different species at different stages. It's not the same for the first 2 or 3 years of a tree life than when the trees are mature. So all that needs to be considered, and to create a management plan that will look at all those needs, but also the staff capacity and expertise to identify gaps and opportunities for support. And these opportunities for support could include professional training, volunteers, nonprofit partners, and student participation. I'm now going to turn it over to Lisa Howard, who's going to talk about the different components or building blocks to consider when designing a schoolyard forest. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you, Ali. I'm going to cover all of these different components today, and we've got not a lot of time, so it might sound a little choppy as I run through this, but I wanted to start with soils. So if you could go to the next one, Lauren. And before I get started, I'm going to be showing a lot of the images that Bay Tree Design has done our own work, but I also am going to be showing examples of work from other designers that we admire from around the world. Their work doesn't necessarily meet US codes, but I think a lot of their intentions could, and there are things that we can aspire to provide for children in these daily landscapes they have access to, that we also like to think of as community commons. Often we call this dirt, and we think of dirt as dirty, but soil is life, and it's really an invisible living system. We need health of soil, we need health of air, we need health of water to impact the quality of our lives. They give us food, they moderate temperatures. Good soil acts as a sponge. So these are all things that we haven't really thought about when we were developing schoolyards, like Alejandra was talking about, like post-World War II, where we really just had to maximize the amount of schools we had to meet the baby boom. But under the paving, as you can see on the top right, soil doesn't have access to water or air. And you can see with this diagram that we've got, this image on the top right is showing what the profile looks like at a schoolyard that we were working on under construction, where they had just removed the asphalt. So you really have this impervious paving, this aggregate base layer under it, all the gravel. And then what happens is in construction, they compact all that native soil. So there's no air pockets to hold water. There's no exchange of air and water. So we want to be thinking about all of this as more of, a system versus just a noun. With that, Berkeley Unified, which Alejandra talked about a little bit, has developed what they have as recommended amount of rootable volume of soil per tree. And they've got a size for large trees, medium trees, and small trees. And thinking about that, the Chiesa system and the soil system, that you have these minimum requirements. Lastly, before you select trees on your site, you can get a relatively inexpensive soil lab analysis, and that will tell you what types of trees are going to thrive in your soil type. So everyone wishes they had planted a tree about 5 years ago. I always hear a lot of clients saying, we really want shade. Can we get one of those shade structures? And the shade structures end up being much more costly in the long term than the trees will once they provide the shade. And the larger the canopy, the more biomass, the more comfortable that shade will be underneath that tree. So as Alejandra was saying, we like to think of them as a long-term investment. How can they moderate weather over time? And for extreme events, how can they help with urban heat island problems, storms, rain and wind, provide seasonal shade, food, habitat, and other benefits? They take a long time to grow, so we need to choose the appropriate trees for the region and the site. Bay Tree Design, working with Chiesa, has developed a list of recommended trees based on each California sunset zone. So this is a palette for California right now, and it's based on studies of climate change and the needs of schools, so supporting learning and play. And this list was developed with Cal Poly and UC Berkeley, and you can see the link there on the bottom of the screen. So there's a leg, it looks like. So one of the things that CAL FIRE recommended, and that in the recent grant application, and that we also recommend, is really selecting trees primarily using 15 gallons. They work best for not just student involvement and being able to plant trees like you're seeing on the screen, but it also, the roots and the canopy size sort of match, and the tree can establish itself in a much healthier way, so that as the tree grows, it doesn't need all of the support systems that you see with large trees that are big box trees that are put in. Those are definitely give you, a instant effect, and they can be used for special situations, but the 15 gallons are really the recommendation. And in terms of 15 gallons, in addition to thinking about each site, it's big picture. It allows to stretch the budget and get more forests in around the state and around the country quicker. So when you're starting to look at your site, Alejandra was talking about, go back, there we go. Looking at mature trees and which ones you have, you can celebrate and support. This image on the top left is a private school located here in El Cerrito, California. And the yard stopped at the edge of those trees, and the kids could look through the fence, the chain link fence, and see those trees, but they didn't have access to them because those trees are on a slope. So the school actually designed a deck that went up and over the slope and then enclosed it. So now this is one of the favorite parts of that yard. So it's a really good example of supporting and celebrating existing trees and incorporating them into a space. For new trees, we like to figure out how we can support them so that we can establish their growth, whether periods of drought, whether being loved by children, wind, deer, thinking about the water needs. In California and other parts of the country, I'm sure we have to think about drought tolerance. So in California, we have the code MWILO, and it's about really picking plants that don't require a lot of water, but also having irrigation methods that are drought tolerant, and sometimes using recycled water. If and when you're using recycled water, you really need to consider which species are going to be able to handle the heavier salt content in that water. I know a lot of redwoods across California are used with the purple pipe, the recycled water, and they're not doing so well with those. So really look into that if you're selecting trees and you're using recycled water. Next. With a healthy forest comes an understory, and that helps the forest, but also helps student emotional health. It gives opportunities for learning and play. An interesting note is that about 84 out of 1,000 children are born with more challenging abilities, from physical challenges to cognitive challenges, and the plants offer a sense of efficacy, calm, security, as well as props for creative, constructive play. So we want to think about what types of plants offer benefits to the children, but we also want to think about what plants are not invasive but are vigorous, so they can outlast the kids, are climate adaptable, are low maintenance for the district, and can be designed in a way that they're protected from foot traffic. So these are just some examples from around the world and California. Next. And with the understory is the forest floor. And we can think about it as surfacing, we can think about it as paving, but we like to think of it as the forest floor because we're talking about the living system of the soil and the living system of the trees and how that all comes together. But we also want to think about it as how do we offer the children of different abilities the opportunity to enjoy this forest floor. So it needs to be a combination of materials that protects the roots from compaction, extreme temperatures, water evaporation, can provide nutrients. All of that is sort of natural materials like mulch, but it's not ADA accessible. So when we're working on something, we want to think about how do you meet code so that there is access to all the important aspects of a forest, and how do you design it so that that access is specific to your school community, providing each child with a sense of exploration as well as dignity that matches their needs. The change in this sort of floor from the rest of the schoolyard is also something that differentiates the space and gives some messaging about sort of play and exploration in terms of how it's different than other parts of the school ground. So on the left are all the examples of different types of flooring. EWF is engineered wood fiber. It's considered ADA accessible if it's maintained and compacted to a certain amount for wheelchair accessibility. Wood decking on the left obviously is fine in concrete and asphalt paths, like on the bottom left, and you can see the wheelchair turnaround spot. And when we're doing these types of paths, we also like to have little secondary paths that go to connect to all of these other places that are already accessible, but might be smaller and not made of accessible materials, so it could be mulch and soil. Next. With the plants, with the surfacings and the forest floor, we also like to think about like, where's the seating in this space? Where's the seating in this forest? How does the seating invite sitting for learning, resting? How does it become part of play and a key component of the space? So these places can be designed for social seating where it's more than one person. It could be a few kids at recess. It could be designed for one person to sit alone. It could be designed for small breakout groups for learning. And this type of seating, we think of it as two different types, as primary and secondary. Primary is more formal. It's a bench or something, a table that when it's empty, it appears empty. And it really serves the purpose of sitting and being there. And then there's secondary seating, which isn't always read as empty when it's not, but it also provides multiple functions. So logs and boulders, they provide opportunities for science lessons. What type of boulder is this? How many rings does the boulder or the log have on it? There also could be elements to balance on or a base for an open-ended game at recess time. Next. And within all of that is the elements that are really affordances that invite different ways to play and different ways to explore. So on the bottom, close to the left, like second over, is a little niche in an outdoor sensory learning garden. Up on the top left is a viewing blind in a habitat forest in England, where the kids could go out into that space with the teacher to see what kind of creatures were moving through the forest. You can integrate active elements into the landscape in these two examples that are from Berlin, but we could easily do this and meet code in California. Creative constructive play with sand and water, loose parts, and then imaginative play like these two little children playing on this sort of canoe or boat that's made out of a log. All of these different types of learning and play opportunities are different than other standard parts of the yard, and they offer different ways for children who might have social challenges to be with their peers and learn. It's a space to recharge. It's a space for self-regulation for all children, so that when they do get back into the classroom, they can focus more. So it's just a way to help children really kind of have different opportunities for learning as well as play. Next. So often when we talk with a client and we talk to them about their schoolyard, the impression that comes across is that it's one big space. It's got chain link on the edges, there's asphalt in the middle, there's a play structure somewhere, and it's one room. But it's really a series of outdoor rooms. And just like a building is a series of rooms, schoolyards are a series of rooms. So how do we denote the edges? How do we separate the ball play from different forms of active play, from quiet play or learning, so that we can say, hey, this is where behavior might be different, or this is where maintenance expectations might be different. Leaves on a basketball court can pose problems, but leaves on a forest floor provide nutrients and loose parts. So we want to really be thinking about how do we intentionally make these rooms, and we can design them by changing in topography, fences, plantings, ecological areas such as a small pond in Japan on the bottom right. Or on the bottom left, it's more of a slow, more gradual edge, but it still gives those messages. And as you can see, the two kids in the foreground playing ball play. Behind me in that photo are kids playing basketball on a full court. Then you see the kids, on the play structure. And then beyond that is this forest nature play area. Next. And with all of that sort of managing expectations, behavioral, or as well as maintenance, is messaging. As adults, we love messaging. We love putting up signs. And when we do that, we need to think about what are the implicit as well as explicit messages that we're providing to the users of this space, primarily the students. And, is this educational? Is it about behavior expectations or something else? So it could be something as much as, how does soil work? What is the soil food web? So this is a CHIPS poster we made for an outdoor learning center. Or on the right, the sign at the top made with the students, including the garden teacher on the bottom is opening day at a nature play space that we designed at a public school in Oakland. And before it was opened, he worked with every class, and they came up with what they wanted to do and how they wanted to cherish the space. So be compassionate, be honest, be respectful, be responsible. They made these rules with the teacher, so it's really their space. And with that, it's going to survive more when you do that type of process. And then on the bottom left is just an area that was developed in a master plan, and the PTA followed up, and they made what was a quiet zone. It's used for kids that have autism during parts of recess. It's used for birthday parties. So having different signs and really thinking about what those messages are, so they bring back dignity, they give dignity to children as well as opportunities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alejandra.
Thank you, Lisa. So now we're going to talk about the process to create a schoolyard forest, including essential steps that lay the foundation for creating thriving schoolyard forests. This is a very comprehensive diagram, what you show here, and it shows the steps in the process. And it's important to really, as you can see that a squiggly line through this diagram, it's important to plan for student and community engagement throughout the process, not just in the master planning and concept design phase. I also wanted to say that this process may look different depending on the size of the project and the budget. In some cases, some of the steps can be shortened or eliminated, but in general, it's good to keep all the steps in mind. So, the first phase, the project planning, is when you raise awareness and get buy-in for the project, with the school and maybe the school board, assemble a project team, develop an engagement plan, a community engagement plan and student engagement plan, explore partnerships, develop and document project goals, understand the approval process, and develop a preliminary budget. During or right after the planning phase, you start with site analysis, understanding code requirements, current uses and circulation, identifying existing assets, really understanding future plans for the school that really need to be taken into account to make sure that the forest is located in the right place. Finding out if there's any hazardous materials in areas, for example, especially if you're going to remove asphalt. Considering the natural context, and it's important also to present the site analysis to the students and to the community to make sure that they are aware of all these aspects. after the site analysis, you can go into a master plan for the whole schoolyard, but that may be too much if you are planning on creating a small forest. But in general, it's important to look at the whole context in order to put the forest in the right place. So some level of master planning or master concept design, it's important to do. And if you do a master plan for the whole schoolyard, because, for example, there's a lot of moving parts and everything needs to be considered, of course, it's important to engage in a participatory process, coordinate with other planned projects, and explore different options. And having a master plan also allows for phased implementation. If you don't have the money to do everything at the same time, you can do one piece at a time. Once you have the location of the forest, going into more specific concept design, refining the program, looking at different options for the schoolyard forest design, and again, presenting options to the students and community, and engaging, continuing the engagement. After that, you move into detailed design, which that's usually done by a landscape architect. And includes detailed drawings of trees, irrigation, layout, seating. And it's very important to, when you're in detailed design, to look back and always have in mind the goals, the project goals and community priorities that were set through the process. And it's also important to think about, okay, what elements need to be done by a contractor versus or facilities versus volunteers and students. So dividing that scope. And then moving to construction and planting. Again, planning with the school calendar is important. Maybe heavy construction should be done when school is not in session, but then really saving planting, mulching, and other activities that can be done with students for during the school year. And then at the end, obviously, stewardship and use, which is as important as all the other steps. So as I mentioned, it's very important to work with students, and students can be involved in many ways through the process, not just voting on the design they like, but they can help with the site analysis. On our website, I want to point out, we have an activity called How Cool Is Your Schoolyard, where students can be actively involved in finding the hotter areas of the schoolyard and documenting that. The students can be involved in understanding community needs, interviewing peers and, their community. They can do research, and they can be also involved in design. I'm going to now turn it over to Lisa for a couple other things to highlight.
Thank you. So in addition to working with the students, we want to work with all the people who inhabit and shape the space for the students. So key people in that are principals and teachers. We meet with the principal first, we meet with teachers early, and we meet with both throughout the process from beginning to end. This is really their space, and without their input, this space isn't going to be successful. The teachers will take the students outside. If we integrate things that are interesting for them to teach about outside, the supervisors will allow students to play in the yard in different ways if they embrace the ideas that we provide in the beginning in the design. So with that, we also want to meet with facilities, the district, how do we talk with facilities and maintenance crews at the district early on? A forest is a real big shift in maintenance typology for all school districts in California. I don't know about places across the country, but definitely here. We want to talk about how it's easier for them. What are the expectations for maintenance and what kind of training might be incorporated into the project? In California, we have money for capital improvements, but we lack resources for really training district crews and really upping up the amount of maintenance that a district can take on. So when we're working on a project, if there's something the district wants to take on and learn in terms of maintenance, we try to incorporate that into what we call our specifications so that the construction budget pays for that training. And just going to wrap up really quickly here on my part, and I'll hand it back. How do you locate a schoolyard forest? The diagram on the right is one that we developed with for the CAL FIRE application for the planning grant this year, working with Sonoma Ecology Center and the school district. The things on the left are all the things that we were considering. The ideas, we worked with the principal, we worked with the district superintendent. for a very preliminary idea of where these forests may land as possibilities. And we talk to them about where's recess, where are the kids every day? Where is it too hot? Where is learning, and what do you need to help support that learning? And then what is the reality of what you could take on in terms of maintenance? And that's how we came up with this diagram, as well as fire lanes, solar panels, and all of that types of infrastructure. Next, and I'm turning it back over to Ali.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point that there's many ways of visualizing the design, and sometimes it's very important. We have Sean Coriel developed an augmented reality app, and the link is on our website, that allows you to be able to place trees and site furniture on the site to be able to see it. This picture's of an earlier version. He has a newer version where the trees look more like trees, but yeah, I encourage you to try it. It's very easy to use. So closing thoughts. Schoolyard forests are simple nature-based solutions that to address pressing cross-sector issues at scale. And this includes impacts of climate change and health and learning inequities. And by engaging students and school community in the design, implementation, and stewardship of their forests, we can maximize health, learning, and environmental students for students and communities. Before closing, I also wanted to mention that a lot of the slides we've shown are designs from many talented designers, including design firms and school districts. To name a few are here on the screen, but again, it's hard to pinpoint one designer because many of these projects have involvement from many, including students and communities. Next. So I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, Alejandra and Lisa, for being here and sharing your expertise. And thank you to the audience for your patience with our tech glitches. We're all used to this. And thank you for showing all of those beautiful pictures and inspiring examples. So we're going to move into some question and answer time. We have a little over 10 minutes. Feel free to put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. We might combine some. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and welcome back Alejandra and Lisa. Some initial questions. There are many. Thank you for your curiosity about these topics. So someone was asking about just in general, Bridget is asking, I'm not really sure how this project is going to work. Who does the designs? How do we get this started? So I know we talked a little bit about the process. Alejandra mentioned this, but I think what would be your advice for like a first step in how to get a project like this started?
Yeah, it could be overwhelming to get going and think that you don't need to do everything at the same time. You can start small, but it's very important to start raising awareness and building the buy-in from the school community and maybe the board, maybe by talking about the benefits of having a project like this at your school campus and district. So I think, again, getting everyone aligned and their shared goals is important to get going. Obviously getting funding is important too, but it's much easier to get funding when you have a huge community behind the project and you have thought about what you want to do. And again, starting, it doesn't need to be a comprehensive whole schoolyard remodel, or you could just start in small increments.
I think it also depends on like what your site is and what your goals are and what your capacity is. Like, just ask yourself those 3 questions. If you're a small daycare, you don't have a lot of paving, it could be as simple as, oh, I'm going to buy a few trees. I'm going to select those trees using the GSA palette for my sunset zone, and I'm going to have a volunteer build. And like, that's pretty easy. If you're like one of the sites that Alejandra showed up the beginning, that the one that she was talking about, the baby boomers, and it's just like C2C asphalt. Okay, you got to take out some asphalt. You got to work with the district. That becomes more complex. And, you know, you might start small. There's a school we're working with, and they started before we jumped on board, where they just bought trees and they planted them in containers and they stuck them on the asphalt. And they're like, okay, now we want to take out asphalt and we want to make a forest. How do we do that? So we're working with them on a master planning process with the CAL FIRE grant. And then from there, they'll go into how do we build this in construction, and how much of that construction needs permits, how much of it needs a general or a professional contractor, and how much of that can be a school, community, you know, volunteer build piece. And so there's like, and everything in between.
Yes. Someone also is asking about skill sets and team members, like who's involved in these kinds of projects. And as you mentioned, there's lots of different roles depending on your project needs. Actually, maybe I'm going to add to that question that someone asked about that, about team members and skill sets. Are there any people that should be involved in this project that maybe are not as obvious? You know, besides students, besides maintenance, facilities, besides having a designer, landscape architect, besides the principal, who's sometimes missing from these projects in your own experience?
We didn't talk about parents or family members, and we didn't talk about recess supervisors. And sometimes those are the teachers and sometimes they're not. And the way a site is supervised really changes how it's being able to be used by the students. But if you come from a school that has a, you know, really involved family community, you can tap into those skills. Is there somebody who's a contractor? Is there somebody who has a truck? Is there somebody who likes to write grants for, you know, applications? And if you come from a school that doesn't have that community, is there a nonprofit nearby that is, you know, that you can like ask for help with? And so there's many people make a village, right? Or it takes a village to raise a kid. And it's the same thing for this. And you just have to think about who are all the party members that you could have on this.
Yeah. I wanted to add that, I completely agree with Lisa. And when I mentioned, you know, assembling your project team, obviously each school community is different, but ideally you have, you know, the principal needs to be on board, of course. Ideally you have a landscape architect, would be a parent volunteer, but someone that kind of is able to kind of look at, that knows how these projects go and the steps, you know, someone, a teacher, or, you know, parent volunteers. I would say whoever's in that project team is willing to drive the project forward and is the conduit to engaging the whole school community. And I would never say no to someone that wants to do that. So if someone says, yes, I want to be involved, you say, sure, let's, you know, we meet regularly. This is how, you know, the project team decides to move forward. And when I mentioned in the presentation, engaging the school community, every school community is different, but I consider the school community not only parents, caretakers, students, teachers, groundskeepers, but you know, it could include community members. It could include nonprofit partners, district staff. I mean, sometimes they don't have a lot of time to participate in all of the meetings, but it's really important to keep them engaged, and they're going to be, in some cases, approving the design. You know, districts have many different departments. Sometimes they have sustainability coordinators and facilities and health and wellness. So again, giving them the opportunity to be part of the project is also important.
Absolutely. And speaking of community, Kelly and others are asking about models of long-term success for these kinds of spaces in lower income or resource poor communities and schools. And noting a common experience of having like raised garden beds, and then they're not taken care of for the long term, or maybe there was a champion at the school and then they left. So I guess on both ends, I don't know if there's any anecdotes that you can share from
Well,
those communities.
that's a very important question, because it is true that there's big inequities in terms of which schools have this beautiful schoolyard forest and which ones don't. And usually public schools in communities with the lowest incomes have asphalt schoolyards. So that's why kind of we're trying to push for a commitment to equity, because that needs to be changed. Examples, well, I have one right behind me. This is Cesar Chavez campus, designed by a Miller Company and the Trust for Public Land, and it's in Oakland in the Fruitvale district. This was built, I think, during the pandemic, so probably 2020. And it's it was all asphalt, and right now it has shade trees and gardens and plants, and some plants don't make it. you also learn it's a living organism, that sometimes you're like, well, this a native plant did not like being in a school environment, and it needs to be replaced by something else. But most importantly, trees are part of the bones, and those are doing well. I think, yes, the point about champions leaving and things getting abandoned, that's a big problem, because this type of projects are not institutionalized and made part of the school and district's overarching goal, right? If it's something driven by a champion that puts the energy and there's no bigger support for that, many times they fail. And so that's why we all need to try to change the bigger picture system, so it doesn't rely on one simple champion, and those champions are actually supported, and they don't have to do all this on their own time and their own energy, to make them happen. And the last thing I would say is that vegetable gardens are they need constant maintenance and a lot of attention, and they're very important teaching tools. But sometimes there's some schoolyard forests that are just trees and mulch, and they require way less constant maintenance. Yes, trees need to be checked by an arborist and make sure that they're in good health, and sometimes thinned, but it's not weekly. Is maybe a less intensive maintenance regime.
Well, I'd say that
part of the questions.
for the landscape architects on this call, I would say it's really our responsibility to design a framework that can last, whether there's community support at the school or not. And I would say that trees are an essential part of that framework. So how do you put trees in so they're going to last? How do you have paths in so they're going to last? But they're not all hard institutional elements, so that there is some softness in the landscape. And with that, maybe you're at one school and that district hasn't really gotten into green schoolyards. Green schoolyards have kind of been a movement in California since the early 2000s. And prior to that, for history background, Robin Moore, a landscape architect, worked at a school as a parent in Washington, at Washington Elementary in Berkeley. So not equitable, but his kids had a forest, and that forest is still there, and now it's 50 years old, and those trees have lasted, despite the fact that a lot of other parts of that project disappeared over time as that community left. So there's the equity part and the framework part, and then there's how do I maintain this? Because for a living schoolyard, there's got to be more than one champion on the site for things to really last, and there has to be somebody that they're handing things to as they're leaving. So we're working with a school in Richmond. There's been a woman that's been running a garden there for 20 years, and a nonprofit's come in, and she's got that nonprofit has 4 or 5 young people learning the ways of this woman who's been teaching there for 20, 30 years. So it's really looking to and respecting those people as incredible resources and making sure that we're learning from them before they go and figuring out systems for that.
Absolutely. We are almost at time, and we could talk about this, but there's so many good questions, and we do have a lot of really wonderful resources on our website. Please check out the Schoolyard Forest resource library. It might answer some of your questions, but also feel free to reach out to us. We're also interested to hear just from your experiences. But I do want to wrap up and say a big thank you to Lisa and Alejandra. Thank you for sharing your expertise, your wisdom, your inspiration. A special note that our next lecture will be on November 2nd, Designing for Children's Health, Learning, and Play. We also hope that you can sign up for updates for our newsletter. You can go to our website for that. There's a link there will be a link in the chat. We hope to see you next time. Please bring a friend. And thank you everyone for all the work that you are already doing in your communities to advocate for and provide wonderful spaces for children now and in the future. Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, Alejandra. And thanks everyone for joining.